The coffee mug slipped from Sarah Martinez's fingers for the third time that morning, ceramic shards scattering across the kitchen floor of her small Phoenix apartment. 6 months since the accident. 6 months since the drunk driver had deboned her patrol car, leaving her with what the doctors politely called post-traumatic tremor syndrome. What her former SWAT teammates less politely called career-ending. Sarah stared at her hands as they trembled involuntarily, the same hands that had once placed a bullet through a quarter-sized target at 300 meters. Before we jump back in, tell US where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The same hands that had saved the mayor's daughter during the downtown bank robbery 2 years ago. Now she couldn't even hold her morning coffee without making a mess. The silence of her apartment was broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning, fighting against the Arizona heat and the occasional siren from the streets below. Sarah had grown to hate that silence. It gave her too much time to think about what she'd lost, too much time to remember the weight of a rifle scope against her eye, the perfect stillness between heartbeats that had once made her the best precision. Shooter in the Phoenix Police Department. Her phone buzzed against the granite countertop, displaying a number she recognized immediately. Captain James Mitchell. Sarah hesitated before answering, knowing that nothing good ever came from her. Former commander calling at 7 in the morning. Martinez. Her voice sounded steadier than her hands felt. Sarah, I need you to come in. Mitchell's voice carried that familiar edge of controlled urgency that she remembered from active situations. We have a situation developing at Riverside Elementary. Sarah's stomach clenched. Riverside Elementary. That was where her younger brother Tommy attended 3rd grade. What kind of situation? The kind that requires your particular skill set. Captain, I'm not active duty anymore. Medical discharge, remember? Sarah held up her trembling hand to the empty apartment, as if Mitchell could see it through the phone. I can barely hold a pen steady, let alone a rifle. Sarah, there's a man with a gun in your brother's classroom. The words hit her like a physical blow. Everything else Mitchell said after that became white noise as Sarah's mind focused on a single, terrible image. Tommy, 8 years old with gap-toothed smile and boundless energy, sitting in a classroom with an armed stranger. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Sarah said, already reaching for her keys with shaking fingers. Sarah, wait. There's something else you need to know. Mitchell's voice softened slightly. The suspect specifically asked for you, by name. The drive to Riverside Elementary felt both endless and far too short. Sarah's old police training kicked in automatically as she navigated through the morning traffic, but her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles went white. Every few seconds, the tremor would intensify, making the wheel jerk slightly in her grasp. Phoenix was already beginning to heat up despite the early hour, the desert sun painting the suburban neighborhoods in harsh golden light. Sarah had driven this route countless times when she was still on active duty, responding to calls throughout the district. She knew every street, every shortcut, every potential obstacle. What she didn't know was why someone holding her brother hostage would specifically request her presence. As she approached the school, Sarah could see the organized chaos that always surrounded major police operations. Squad cars formed a perimeter around the 2-story brick building, their red and blue lights painting the morning in alternating colors. News vans were already arriving, reporters setting up their equipment behind the police barriers. Sarah recognized the controlled urgency in the officers' movements, the way they positioned themselves with practiced efficiency. Captain Mitchell appeared at her car window before she'd even fully stopped. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much in his 25 years on the force. Sarah had worked under him for 3 years in SWAT, and she'd never seen him look quite this tense. "Fill me in," Sarah said as she stepped out of her Honda Civic. immediately noticing how different it felt to be at a crime scene without her tactical gear and service weapon. Vincent Parker, 43 years old, former security guard at the school, terminated 3 weeks ago for erratic behavior and suspected drinking on the job. Mitchell walked beside her toward the mobile command unit that had been set up in the school's parking lot. This morning at 8:15, he entered the building through a service entrance he still had access to. He's barricaded himself in Mrs. Henderson's third-grade classroom with 23 children and 2 adults. Sarah's heart clenched as she processed the numbers. 23 8- and 9-year-olds, plus their teacher and a classroom aide. And somewhere among those children was Tommy. What are his demands? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. He wants to talk to Shaky Sarah, his exact words. Mitchell's expression was grim. He seems to know about your condition, about what happened to you. He specifically mentioned the accident. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How could he possibly know about that? We're working on it. But Sarah, right now that's not our biggest concern. He's been in there for almost 2 hours, and the kids are getting scared. Every negotiation attempt has been met with the same response. He'll only talk to you. They reached the command unit, a sophisticated mobile operations center filled with communication equipment, tactical displays, and personnel coordinating the response. Sarah recognized several faces from her SWAT days, officers who had once been her teammates. The looks they gave her were complex mixtures of sympathy, uncertainty, and something that might have been hope. Martinez, good to see you. Officer David Kim approached from the communications station. He'd been Sarah's spotter during her active years, the steady voice in her earpiece who had helped her make some of the most difficult shots of her career. Now he looked at her with obvious concern. How are you holding up? I've been better, Sarah admitted, unconsciously clasping her hands together to hide the tremor. What's the tactical situation? David led her to a large monitor displaying the school's floor plan. Parker's in classroom 2B, second floor, east wing. The room has 4 large windows facing the parking lot, but he's positioned himself so that he has a clear view of all approaches. He's armed with what appears to be a hunting rifle, and he's demonstrated knowledge of our standard breach procedures. Sarah studied the layout, her tactical mind automatically calculating angles and approaches despite her current civilian status. Sniper positions? That's where it gets complicated. David pointed to several marked locations on a broader area map. Best line of sight is from the water tower 400 meters northwest of the building. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clear view into the classroom, minimal wind interference, elevated position for optimal angle. Sarah knew the water tower. It was an old structure from the 1960s, abandoned when the city upgraded its water systems but never demolished. During her active years, she'd used it twice for long-range surveillance operations. The platform at the top was stable, spacious enough for a shooter and spotter, and provided an unobstructed view of the entire school complex. 400 meters, Sarah murmured, more to herself than to David. It wasn't an impossible distance, but it wasn't easy either. Even in her prime, a shot at that range required perfect conditions, flawless technique, and absolute steadiness. Sarah, Captain Mitchell appeared beside them, holding a tablet that displayed a live feed from inside the classroom. You need to see this. Sarah's breath caught as she looked at the screen. The camera, apparently from a laptop that had been turned to face the room, showed 23 children sitting in a rough circle on the classroom carpet. They looked scared but unharmed, some holding hands, others clutching stuffed animals or backpacks. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 50s whom Sarah remembered from Tommy's parent-teacher conferences, sat with them, clearly trying to keep the children calm. And there, in the front row wearing his favorite blue superhero t-shirt, was Tommy. He looked small and frightened, but he was alive and uninjured. Parker set up the camera himself about an hour ago, Mitchell explained. He said he wanted us to see that everyone was safe, but also to understand what was at stake. Where is he positioned? Near the door, mostly out of camera view. He occasionally moves into frame, always keeping the rifle visible. He's been calm but firm in his demands. He only wants to talk to you. Sarah watched the screen for several more minutes, studying Parker's movements when he appeared in frame, analyzing the classroom layout, looking for any detail that might be useful. The man appeared to be in his 40s, average build, moving with the careful precision of someone who was trying very hard to stay in control of the situation. Has he made any threats? Sarah asked. Not explicit ones, but the implication is clear. He's demonstrated knowledge of the building's layout, our standard procedures, and even details about your background that aren't public knowledge. This isn't random, Sarah. This is planned. Sarah felt a wave of nausea as the implications settled in. Someone had specifically targeted her, used her brother and his classmates as leverage to force a confrontation. The question was why? Captain, I need to be honest with you. Sarah held up her hands, letting Mitchell see the tremor that she'd been trying to hide. I haven't fired a weapon since the accident. I can barely sign my name legibly on a good day. What you're asking me to do? I'm not asking you to take a shot, Mitchell interrupted. I'm asking you to talk to him, find out what he wants, why he specifically requested you. Maybe we can resolve this without anyone getting hurt. Sarah looked back at the screen showing her brother and his classmates. Tommy was holding hands with a little girl Sarah recognized from school pickup, both of them looking toward something off camera. Probably Parker, reminding them of his presence. What if talking isn't enough? Sarah asked quietly. What if this escalates to the point where someone needs to take the shot? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. We have other snipers on scene. Officer Rodriguez is positioned on the adjacent building. Officer Chun is in the school parking structure. Both of them have clear sight lines, but not as clear as the water tower position. No, Mitchell admitted, not as clear. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to push down the fear that was threatening to overwhelm her logical thinking. 6 months ago, she would have been the obvious choice for the situation. Her record spoke for itself, 43 precision shots in active situations, all of them successful, all of them saving lives. She'd been the department's go-to sniper for hostage situations, barricaded suspects, and high-risk operations. But that was before the accident, before the tremor that had ended her career and left her struggling to perform basic tasks that she'd once taken for granted. Sarah. David's voice was gentle but urgent. I know this is asking a lot, but those kids need you. Not necessarily as a shooter, but as someone who can get inside this guy's head, figure out what he really wants. Sarah opened her eyes and looked around the command center. She saw the faces of her former colleagues, the tension in their postures, the weight of responsibility that came with 25 lives hanging in the balance. She thought about Tommy, probably wondering why his big sister wasn't there to protect him like she'd promised she always would. All right, Sarah said finally. Let me talk to him. The communication equipment was set up within minutes. Sarah found herself sitting in front of a microphone, wearing a headset that connected her directly to the classroom's public address system. Her hands were shaking worse than they had all morning, but she clasped them together and tried to project the calm authority that had once been second nature. Vincent? Sarah's voice echoed slightly through the speakers. This is Sarah Martinez. I understand you wanted to talk to me. There was a long pause before Parker's voice came through the speakers, transmitted from the classroom's intercom system. Shaky Sarah, I wondered if you'd actually show up. The nickname hit her like a slap. It was what some of the more cruel officers had started calling her after the accident. whispered behind her back when they thought she couldn't hear. The fact that Parker knew about it confirmed that this was deeply personal. "I'm here now," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "What do you want to talk about?" "I want to talk about failure," Parker replied. "About what happens when the people who are supposed to protect us can't even protect themselves." Sarah felt Mitchell's hand on her shoulder, a silent reminder to stay calm and focused. "Vincent, I can see the children on the camera. They look scared. Whatever issues you have with me, they don't deserve to be involved in this, don't they?" Parker's voice carried a bitter edge. "Tell me, Sarah, how many children were in the car that hit you?" Sarah's blood went cold. The accident had been a traumatic blur, something she'd tried hard not to think about in the months since. The drunk driver who had T-boned her patrol car had been alone, but there had been another vehicle involved, a car that had swerved to avoid the collision. "Vincent, I don't understand what you're asking." "The blue Honda Civic, the one that rolled 3 times trying to avoid hitting you. My daughter Emma was in the back seat." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd known there had been other injuries in the accident, but she'd been unconscious for 2 days afterward and had never been given details about the other victims. Her recovery had focused entirely on her own injuries, her own struggle to deal with the tremor and the end of her career. Emma Parker, age 7. She was in a coma for 6 weeks after the accident. When she woke up, she couldn't walk. The doctors say she may never walk again. Parker's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the rage underneath. "You want to talk about shaky hands? My daughter shakes every time she tries to move her legs." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as the full weight of Parker's words settled on her. A 7-year-old girl, paralyzed because of an accident that had also destroyed Sarah's career. The drunk driver had caused the collision, but Sarah understood why Parker blamed her. In his mind, if she hadn't been there, if she hadn't been in that intersection at that moment, his daughter would still be walking. "Vincent, I'm so sorry about Emma. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know." Parker's voice cut through her apology. "Nobody bothered to tell the hero cop about the little girl whose life was destroyed. You got your medical discharge, your pension, your sympathy from the department. Emma got a wheelchair and years of physical therapy that might not ever help." Sarah looked at Mitchell, who was frantically typing on his tablet, probably trying to get more information about Emma Parker and the specifics of the accident. David was monitoring other communication channels, coordinating with the tactical teams positioned around the school. "Vincent, what do you want from me?" Sarah asked. "How does holding these children hostage help Emma? I want you to understand what it feels like to be helpless. To watch someone you love suffer because of choices other people made." Parker's voice was getting more agitated. "I want you to know what it's like when the people who are supposed to save lives can't save the ones that matter most." Sarah understood now why Parker had specifically requested her, why he'd emphasized her tremor, why he'd set up this elaborate hostage situation. This wasn't about money or political demands or even revenge in the traditional sense. This was about making her feel the same helplessness that he'd experienced watching his daughter struggle with paralysis. "Vincent, I understand your anger. If I could trade places with Emma, if I could take her injuries and give her back her mobility, I would do it in a heartbeat." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "But hurting these children won't help Emma. It won't change what happened to either of us." "Maybe not," Parker replied. "But it will make you understand. When you're forced to watch helplessly while innocent children suffer, maybe you'll finally know what I've been living with for 6 months." Sarah looked at the monitor showing the classroom. Tommy was still sitting in the circle with his classmates, but she could see that some of the children were starting to cry. Mrs. Henderson was doing her best to keep them calm, but the tension in the room was becoming obvious even through the camera feed. "Vincent, please. These children haven't done anything wrong. Tommy is my little brother, and I can see that he's scared. But so is every other child in that room. They don't deserve to pay for what happened between us. Deserve? Parker's voice rose slightly. Did Emma deserve to lose the use of her legs? Did she deserve to spend her 8th birthday in a hospital bed, learning to use a wheelchair? Sarah felt the weight of every word. She'd spent 6 months focusing on her own loss, her own struggle with disability, without ever considering that there might be other victims of the same accident. The guilt was overwhelming, but she forced herself to stay focused on the immediate situation. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "Emma didn't deserve what happened to her, and I should have known about her injuries. I should have reached out to your family. That's my failure, and I'm sorry for it." There was a long silence from the classroom. Sarah could hear the faint sounds of children sniffling and whispering to each other. Mrs. Henderson's voice occasionally came through, gentle reassurances that everything would be okay. "Vincent, can I ask you something?" Sarah continued. "What would Emma want you to do right now? If she could see her father holding a classroom full of children hostage, what would she say?" "Don't," Parker's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare try to use my daughter against me. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm asking you to think about the kind of man Emma needs you to be. She's going to need her father to help her navigate a world that isn't always accessible to people with disabilities. She's going to need you to be strong, to be patient, to show her that her life still has value and meaning." Sarah paused, looking at her own trembling hands. "I've spent 6 months feeling sorry for myself because of this tremor. I've let it define me, let it convince me that I'm worthless. But talking to you right now, trying to help these children, this is the first time since the accident that I've felt like I might still have something to offer." Mitchell was writing something on a notepad and sliding it across to Sarah. It read, "Stalling for time. Rodriguez is moving to backup position. Keep him talking." Sarah nodded slightly and continued, "Vincent, what if instead of making each other understand helplessness, we tried to help each other find purpose again? I could visit Emma, maybe help her understand that having a disability doesn't mean your life is over. And maybe you could help me figure out how to be useful again, how to make my condition work for me instead of against me." "It's too late for that," Parker replied, but his voice sounded less certain than before. "It's not too late. Emma is 8 years old. She has her whole life ahead of her. And these children in your classroom, they have their whole lives ahead of them too. You have the power right now to make sure they get to live those lives." Sarah could see movement on one of the tactical displays. Officer Rodriguez was indeed moving to a secondary position, but Sarah also noticed that Officer Chun had been repositioned closer to the building. They were preparing for multiple contingencies. "Vincent, I want to make you a promise. If you let these children go safely, I will personally make sure that Emma gets every resource, every opportunity, every bit of support that she needs. I'll advocate for her. I'll help your family navigate the system. I'll do whatever it takes to help her thrive." "Promises from a cop with shaky hands," Parker said, but there was less venom in his voice. "Why should I believe you? Because I know what it's like to lose everything you thought defined you. I know what it's like to feel like your life is over, because your body won't do what it used to do. And I know that the only way forward is to find new ways to be useful, new ways to matter." Sarah looked at the camera feed showing her brother and his classmates. Tommy was looking directly at the camera now, as if he somehow knew his sister was watching. The sight of his frightened face strengthened her resolve. "Vincent, those children are looking to you right now to make a choice. You can choose to be the man who traumatized them forever, or you can choose to be the man who ultimately kept them safe. Emma will grow up knowing which choice her father made. Make it one she can be proud of." The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the tremor in her hands intensifying with the stress. Around her, the command center was tense with anticipation, everyone waiting for Parker's response. "I want to see you," Parker said finally. "Not on the radio. Face to face." Mitchell immediately started shaking his head, but Sarah held up a hand to stop him. "Where do you want to meet?" "Classroom 2A, right across the hall from where I am. Now come alone, unarmed, hands visible at all times." "Vincent, that's not safe for either of us." "What if those are my terms?" Parker interrupted. "You want to save these kids? You want to help Emma? Then you come here and look me in the eye when you make your promises." Sarah looked at Mitchell, who was emphatically shaking his head. David was already pulling up building schematics, calculating approach routes and potential complications. The entire command center was buzzing with activity as everyone tried to process this new development. "Give me 10 minutes to get there," Sarah said. "Sarah, absolutely not," Mitchell said as soon as she took off the headset. "We cannot allow you to enter that building. It's tactically unsound, it puts you at unnecessary risk, and it gives Parker additional leverage. Captain, he's not going to release those children until he gets what he wants. And what he wants is to look me in the eye and make me understand his pain." Sarah stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. "Maybe if I can give him that, really listen to him, really acknowledge what his family has been through, maybe he'll let those kids go. Or maybe he'll take you hostage too, and we'll have 26 lives at risk instead of 25. Sarah looked at the monitor showing the classroom one more time. Tommy was still holding the little girl's hand, but now he was whispering something to her, probably trying to comfort her the way Sarah had always comforted him when he was scared. "Captain, 6 months ago you would have trusted me to handle a situation like this. I know I'm not the same person I was before the accident, but I'm still a police officer. I still know how to read people, how to de-escalate situations, how to protect innocent lives. Sarah, your condition. My condition doesn't affect my judgment or my training. It just affects my hands." Sarah looked around the command center at the faces of her former colleagues. "Look, I know that none of you would choose me for a tactical operation anymore. I know that my shooting days are over. But this isn't about shooting. This is about talking to a father who's desperate to make someone understand his pain. David, step forward. If you're going to do this, at least let me position myself as backup. I can be in the adjacent hallway, ready to provide support if things go wrong." Mitchell looked like he wanted to argue further, but Sarah could see him weighing the options. Standard negotiation tactics weren't working. Parker had been clear that he would only deal with Sarah. The longer the situation continued, the more likely it was that someone would get hurt. "All right," Mitchell said finally. "But you wear a vest, you carry your radio, and you follow our protocols exactly. Any sign that the situation is deteriorating, and we extract you immediately." Sarah nodded, already mentally preparing herself for what might be the most important conversation of her life. As she strapped on the bulletproof vest and checked the radio equipment, she thought about Emma Parker, a 8-year-old girl learning to navigate the world from a wheelchair. She thought about Tommy and his classmates, counting on her to find a way to get them home safely. And for the first time since the accident, Sarah Martinez felt like she might actually be the right person for the job. The hallway of Riverside Elementary felt different than Sarah remembered from Tommy's school events. Without the usual bustle of children and teachers, the corridor seemed unnaturally quiet, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of air conditioning. Her footsteps echoed against the polished linoleum floor as she made her way toward the east wing, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sarah's hands were trembling more violently now, the stress of the situation amplifying her condition, to the point where she had to keep them clasped behind her back to maintain any semblance of professional composure. The bulletproof vest felt foreign and bulky after months of civilian life, and the radio clipped to her collar crackled occasionally with updates from the command center. David's voice came through her earpiece, barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I'm positioned in the west stairwell. Visual on the corridor leading to classroom 2A. No movement detected." "Copy," Sarah replied quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. As she approached the second floor, Sarah could see that the school had been evacuated with remarkable efficiency. Classroom doors stood open, revealing empty desks and abandoned backpacks. Children's artwork still decorated the walls, bright and cheerful drawings that seemed surreal in the context of the current crisis. Tommy's crayon masterpiece from last month's art show hung near the water fountain, a proud depiction of their family dog that he'd insisted she come see during pickup. Approaching the target floor, Sarah whispered into her radio. "Roger, Parker's been quiet for the last 5 minutes. No movement visible on the classroom camera." Mitchell's voice carried tension that matched Sarah's own stress level. Sarah reached the top of the stairs and paused, taking a moment to steady her breathing and center herself. The training from her SWAT years felt distant, but not forgotten. Assess the environment, control your physiological responses, maintain situational awareness. The fundamentals were still there, even if her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Classroom 2A was 30 feet down the hallway from where she stood. Across the corridor, she could see the closed door of classroom 2B, where Vincent Parker held her brother and 22 other children. The proximity was unsettling. Parker would be able to hear every word of their conversation, would know exactly where she was at all times. "Vincent, I'm outside classroom 2A, Sarah called out, loud enough for her voice to carry across the hallway. "Door's unlocked. Come in slowly, hands where I can see them." Sarah pushed open the door to 2A and stepped inside. The classroom was a mirror image of 2B, with the same layout of desks, the same cheerful bulletin boards, the same large windows facing the parking lot. But instead of 23 frightened children, this room contained only empty chairs and the lingering scent of markers and glue sticks. Parker appeared in the doorway of 2B, his hunting rifle held casually but ready. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, perhaps 5'8" with thinning brown hair and the soft build of someone who worked a desk job. His clothes were rumpled, suggesting he'd been planning this confrontation for some time. What struck Sarah most was his eyes. They held the particular exhaustion that came from months of sleepless nights and helpless worry. "So you're the famous Shaky Sarah," Parker said, his voice carrying across the hallway. "You look smaller than I expected." "Most people do when you're not looking at them through a rifle scope," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral and non-confrontational. Parker almost smiled at that. "Fair enough. Turn around slowly. I want to make sure you're not carrying anything you shouldn't be." Sarah complied, rotating slowly with her hands raised. The tremor was visible now, impossible to hide, and she saw Parker's expression change as he noticed it. "Jesus, it really is that bad, isn't it?" Parker's voice held something that might have been sympathy. "The report said you had nerve damage, but seeing it in person." "It's manageable," Sarah said, though they both knew that was a generous description of her condition. "Manageable enough to hold a rifle steady?" Sarah met his eyes across the hallway. "We both know the answer to that question." Parker nodded slowly, then stepped back into classroom 2B. "Take a seat anywhere you like. We can talk from here." Sarah chose a student desk near the windows, positioning herself so she could see Parker when he appeared in his doorway while also maintaining visual contact with the tactical teams outside. The small plastic chair was clearly designed for 8-year-olds, making her feel awkward and off balance. "Tell me about Emma," Sarah said. The simple request seemed to catch Parker off guard. He'd clearly been expecting accusations, negotiations, or attempts to manipulate him. Instead, Sarah had asked about the one thing that mattered most to him. She's 8 years old. Was 8 when it happened anyway. She's 9 now. Parker's voice softened noticeably. Smartest kid in her class. She was going to be a veterinarian. Loved animals more than anything else in the world. She still can, Vincent. Being in a wheelchair doesn't prevent someone from becoming a veterinarian. You think it's that simple? Parker's voice hardened again. You think we just adjust her expectations and everything goes back to normal? She can't even reach the sink in our bathroom without help. She can't climb the stairs to her bedroom. She can't run around the playground with her friends. Sarah thought about her own adjustments over the past 6 months. The simple tasks that had become monumental challenges, the career that had been stripped away, the identity crisis that came with sudden disability. But she also thought about the adaptive equipment she'd seen at the rehabilitation center, the stories of people who had rebuilt their lives around new limitations. No, it's not simple, Sarah admitted. Nothing about sudden disability is simple. But it's not impossible either. Easy words from someone who can still walk. Harder words from someone who can't hold her hand steady enough to write her own name. Sarah held up her trembling hands. Vincent, I'm not minimizing what Emma is going through. I'm saying that both of us have learned that life doesn't end when your body stops working the way it used to. Parker was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could hear the faint sounds of children talking in the background of classroom 2B. Mrs. Henderson's voice occasionally rose above the others, clearly working to keep her students calm and occupied. She cries at night, Parker said suddenly. Emma, she tries to hide it, but I can hear her through the bedroom wall. She dreams about running, about dancing, about all the things she used to do. Then she wakes up and remembers. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. She'd had similar dreams, memories of the steady hands that had once made her the best sniper in the department. The phantom sensation of perfect control, followed by the cruel reality of waking up to trembling fingers and ruined career prospects. I know those dreams, Sarah said quietly. I dream about taking the perfect shot, about the stillness between heartbeats when everything was possible. Then I wake up and try to pour coffee. So you understand why I'm here. Why I needed you to see what helplessness really looks like. Sarah looked toward classroom 2B, thinking about Tommy and his classmates sitting on the floor, probably wondering why their normal school day had become something out of a nightmare. Vincent, I understand your pain. I understand wanting someone else to feel the helplessness you've been living with. But those children in there, they're not responsible for what happened to Emma. No, they're not. But they're experiencing what Emma experiences every day. The fear, the uncertainty, the dependence on other people for their safety. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Parker stepped fully into his doorway, the rifle still in his hands but pointed toward the floor. Isn't it? Emma wakes up every morning in a world that wasn't designed for her, surrounded by obstacles she can't overcome on her own. She depends on other people for basic tasks that used to be automatic. Sarah could see the pain in Parker's face, the exhaustion of a parent who had watched his child struggle and felt powerless to help. She recognized it because she'd seen similar expressions on her own parents' faces during her recovery. Vincent, what if I told you that Emma could have a full, meaningful life? That there are adaptive technologies, support systems, opportunities that could help her achieve whatever dreams she's willing to pursue? I'd say you're an idealistic cop who doesn't understand what it's really like. I'd say I'm a disabled cop who spent 6 months learning about adaptive technologies because I was too stubborn to accept that my career was over. This seemed to give Parker pause. He studied Sarah's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What do you mean? Sarah held up her trembling hands again. 3 weeks ago, I met with Dr. Rachel Foster at Phoenix General. She's a neurologist who specializes in movement disorders. She told me about stabilization systems, adaptive equipment, retraining programs. She said that with the right tools and techniques, I might be able to return to limited duty. Might be. No guarantees, no miracle cures. But possibilities, options that didn't exist 20 years ago. Sarah paused, watching Parker's reaction. The same kind of options that exist for Emma. Mobility aids that go far beyond basic wheelchairs. Computer interfaces that respond to eye movements. Prosthetics that can be controlled by thought patterns. Parker's expression was skeptical. And how exactly do you know about all this? Because I was exactly where you are 3 months ago. Angry, bitter, convinced that my life was over. I spent 2 months feeling sorry for myself before my brother Tommy dragged me to a support group for people with acquired disabilities. Sarah thought about that first meeting. How uncomfortable she'd been surrounded by people whose injuries seemed so much more severe than her own. A veteran who'd lost both legs to an IED. A woman whose multiple sclerosis had progressed to the point where she needed assistance with basic daily tasks. A teenager who'd been paralyzed in a diving accident. There was a girl there, maybe 16 years old. Spinal cord injury from a car accident, complete paralysis from the chest down. She was training to compete in Paralympic archery. She was planning to study engineering, specializing in adaptive technology design. Sarah met Parker's eyes. She told me that her accident had shown her problems she wanted to spend her life solving. One success story doesn't mean, Vincent, there were 12 people in that support group. All of them dealing with acquired disabilities, all of them at different stages of adaptation. Some were still angry, still grieving what they'd lost. Others had found new directions, new purposes. But all of them were moving forward. Parker was quiet for several minutes. Sarah could hear Mrs. Henderson reading to the children, her voice artificially cheerful as she tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Occasionally, a child's voice would interrupt with a question or comment, and Sarah's heart clenched every time she heard Tommy's distinctive giggle. "The doctors told us Emma would never walk again," Parker said finally. "The doctors told me I'd never be able to return to active duty, that my hands would never be steady enough for precision work." Sarah looked down at her trembling fingers. "They might be right about that. But they also told me I'd never be able to drive safely, never be able to live independently, never be able to contribute meaningfully to law enforcement again. And I drove here this morning. I'm living in my own apartment, and right now, I'm doing police work." Sarah gestured toward the hallway between them. "It's not the same police work I used to do, but it's still important work." Parker shifted his position slightly, and Sarah noticed that he seemed less tense than he had when she'd first arrived. The rifle was still in his hands, but his grip had relaxed somewhat. "What exactly are you proposing?" Parker asked. "I'm proposing that we focus on solutions instead of blame. That we get these children back to their families safely, and then we work together to make sure Emma has every opportunity to build the life she wants." "And what does that look like, practically speaking?" Sarah had been thinking about this since her conversation with Dr. Foster, formulating ideas that she'd been too scared to pursue for herself. "It looks like connecting Emma with other kids who faced similar challenges. It looks like exploring adaptive sports programs, assistive technology, educational support systems. It looks like making sure she knows that her life still has unlimited potential." Pretty words. But what about the practical stuff? The medical bills, the equipment costs, the modifications our house needs? This was territory Sarah understood. Her own medical expenses had been largely covered by her police insurance, but she'd seen the bills. The cost of adaptive equipment, ongoing therapy, and home modifications could be overwhelming for most families. "Vincent, I can't promise to solve every financial challenge your family faces. But I can promise to help you navigate the system, to connect you with resources, to advocate for Emma whenever she needs it." Sarah paused. "And I can promise that if you let these children go home safely, I'll make sure your story gets told. That people understand what families like yours are going through." Parker looked toward classroom 2B, where his hostages waited. And what about accountability? Someone destroyed my daughter's life, and everyone just moved on like it didn't matter. Vincent, the person who destroyed Emma's life, was the drunk driver who ran that red light. He's serving a prison sentence for vehicular assault. I was just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if you hadn't been there, if I hadn't been there, that drunk driver still would have been barreling through the intersection. He might have hit a school bus, or a family with young children, or elderly pedestrians. The accident was going to happen regardless. I just happened to be one of the victims. This was the hardest part for Sarah to accept about the accident. The randomness of it, the way that a single moment of someone else's poor judgment had rippled out to affect so many lives. Emma's paralysis, Sarah's tremor, the drunk driver's imprisonment, the families torn apart by a single collision. Emma asks me why it happened to her, Parker said quietly. Why she was the one who got hurt. I don't know what to tell her. Tell her the truth. That sometimes terrible things happen to good people for no reason at all. But also tell her that how she responds to those terrible things is what defines who she becomes. Sarah thought about the conversation she'd had with her own counselor, the struggle to find meaning in senseless tragedy, the search for purpose in the aftermath of loss. Vincent, Emma is going to face challenges that most kids her age never even think about. But she's also going to develop strength, resilience, and perspective that will serve her throughout her life. She's going to understand things about courage and adaptation that most people never learn. You're asking me to see her disability as a gift. I'm asking you to see Emma as a complete person who happens to have a disability. Not a broken child who needs to be fixed, but a whole person who's learning to navigate the world in a different way. Parker was quiet for a long time, and Sarah could see him processing everything she'd said. The anger was still there, the grief and frustration that had driven him to this desperate act. But there was something else now, too. A flicker of hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of hope. If I let these kids go, Parker said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you'll follow through on your promises? You have my word as a police officer. And you have the fact that I understand exactly what Emma is going through because I'm living my own version of it every day. Sarah held up her trembling hands again. Vincent, 6 months ago, I would have told you that life without steady hands wasn't worth living. That a sniper who couldn't hold a rifle was no longer a real police officer. But sitting here right now, talking to you, trying to save these children, this feels more like real police work than anything I did in my last year on SWAT. Because you're not hiding behind a scope this time. Because I'm using different skills. Communication, empathy, understanding. The tools I needed to help these kids weren't the ones I thought I'd lost in the accident. Parker looked directly at Sarah for the first time since she'd arrived. You really think Emma can have a normal life? I think Emma can have an extraordinary life. It won't be the life you originally imagined for her, but it could be something even better. Something that makes a difference in ways you never expected. Sarah thought about the Paralympic archer from her support group, the way her eyes had lit up when she talked about her training regimen and competitive goals. The teenager had radiated purpose and excitement in a way that had been both inspiring and intimidating. There's a program at Arizona State University, Sarah continued. They're developing new mobility technologies, working with students who have spinal cord injuries. Emma could be part of that research, helping to design solutions that will help other kids facing similar challenges. She's 9 years old. She's 9 years old with her whole life ahead of her. And she has a father who loves her enough to risk everything trying to protect her. Sarah met Parker's eyes. Vincent, the question isn't whether Emma can overcome her challenges. The question is whether you're going to help her or hold her back. This seemed to hit Parker hard. He leaned against the doorframe of classroom 2B, the rifle now hanging loose in his hands. I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to make any of this better. Neither do I, Sarah admitted. But I know people who do. And I know that the first step is getting these children back to their families so that we can focus on helping Emma instead of creating more trauma. Parker was quiet for several minutes, and Sarah could hear increased activity on her radio. Mitchell's voice came through her earpiece, barely audible. Sarah, we're showing increased movement from Parker's position. What's his status? Sarah touched her radio briefly to acknowledge the transmission, but didn't respond verbally. She could see that Parker was struggling with his decision, weighing his desperation for justice against his love for his daughter. Vincent, what would Emma want you to do right now? Sarah asked. She'd want me to come home. She's been staying with her grandparents since this morning. She doesn't even know what I'm doing here. Then let's make sure you can go home to her. Let's end this before it becomes something you can never take back. Parker looked toward the windows of classroom 2B, where Sarah could see the small faces of children peering out at the police cars in the parking lot. Tommy was among them, his nose pressed against the glass as he watched the activity outside. If I let them go, what happens to me? Sarah had been dreading this question because she knew the answer wouldn't be what Parker wanted to hear. Vincent, you'll be arrested. You'll face charges for kidnapping, terroristic threats, probably several other felonies. But if no one gets hurt, if you release the children voluntarily, that will count in your favor. Prison. Probably some prison time, yes, but not life in prison. Not if this ends peacefully. Parker's shoulders sagged as the full weight of his situation became clear. He'd been so focused on making Sarah understand his pain that he hadn't fully considered the long-term consequences of his actions. Emma will grow up with a father in prison. Emma will grow up knowing that her father made the right choice when it mattered most. That when he had the chance to hurt innocent people or protect them, he chose to protect them. Sarah could see Parker struggling with the decision, torn between his desire for revenge and his love for his daughter. She pressed on, knowing this might be her only chance to reach him. Vincent, Emma is going to face enough challenges in her life. Don't add the burden of knowing that her father hurt children to the list of things she has to overcome. Part 3. The weight of choices. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the soft murmur of children's voices from classroom 2B, and the occasional crackle of radio traffic from the command center below. Sarah watched Vincent Parker's face as he wrestled with the decision that would define the rest of his life, and more importantly, the rest of his daughter's life. Parker's grip on the rifle had loosened considerably during their conversation, and Sarah noticed that he kept glancing toward the window where the children sat. Each time he looked at them, his expression grew more conflicted, as if seeing their frightened faces made his mission feel less righteous and more cruel. You know what the worst part is? Parker said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me. Emma still talks about becoming a veterinarian. Like nothing's changed. Like she can still chase after sick animals and climb into haylofts and do all the things that job requires. Parker's voice cracked slightly. I don't have the heart to tell her it's impossible. Sarah felt a surge of something that surprised her, indignation on Emma's behalf. Not at Parker's situation, but at his assumptions about his daughter's capabilities. Vincent, why do you think it's impossible? Because she can't walk. Because veterinary work is physical. Because the world isn't designed for people in wheelchairs. Have you researched veterinary programs for people with disabilities? Have you looked into adaptive techniques, modified work environments, assistive technologies? Sarah's voice carried more edge than she'd intended. Or did you just decide that your daughter's dreams were over without investigating the possibilities? Parker's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare lecture me about my daughter's limitations. I've spent 9 months watching her struggle with basic tasks. I know what she can and can't do. You know what she can and can't do right now, with limited training and basic equipment. That's not the same as knowing what she could do with proper support and adaptive technology. Sarah pulled out her phone, grateful that her tremor wasn't interfering too much with the touchscreen interface. "Vincent, I want to show you something. A video I found last week when I was researching adaptive career options." She navigated to a saved video and held the phone up so Parker could see the screen from across the hallway. The video showed veterinarian working in a modern animal clinic, examining a large dog with practiced efficiency. What made the video remarkable was that the veterinarian was seated in a wheelchair, using a height-adjustable examination table and specialized equipment designed for accessibility. "Dr. Michelle Rodriguez," Sarah explained as the video played. "She was paralyzed in a climbing accident during her second year of veterinary school. She's now one of the leading equine veterinarians in California, specializing in treating horses with mobility issues." Parker was staring at the screen with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "That's different. She was already in veterinary school. She had training, but she had to relearn everything. New techniques, new equipment, new ways of approaching the same problems she'd been studying before her accident." Sarah paused the video on a shot of Dr. Rodriguez working with a horse, both of them adapting to their respective limitations. "Vincent, Emma is 9 years old. She has 10 years before she even starts thinking about veterinary school. Imagine what adaptive technologies will exist by then. But the physical demands are changing. Modern veterinary practice relies more on diagnostic technology, less on brute strength. And for procedures that do require physical manipulation, there are mechanical assists, robotic tools, collaborative techniques." Sarah scrolled to another video. "Look at this surgical suite. The equipment is designed so that a veterinarian can perform complex procedures while seated, using precision instruments that actually provide better control than traditional handheld tools." Parker watched the second video in silence, and Sarah could see his preconceptions being challenged in real time. The veterinarian in this video was performing delicate surgery on a small bird, using microscopic instruments controlled by hand movements that were amplified and steadied by computer systems. That's basically the same technology that allows people with tremors to perform precision work, Sarah added, holding up her own shaking hands. "You've really researched this." "I've researched everything. Adaptive technologies for law enforcement, alternative career paths, retraining programs. Because I refuse to accept that my life was over just because my hands shake." Sarah pocketed her phone and leaned forward in the small plastic chair. "Vincent, what if Emma's accident doesn't end her dreams? What if it redirects them towards something even more meaningful?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Emma becomes the veterinarian who specializes in treating animals with mobility issues? What if she develops new techniques for helping injured animals recover? What if her personal experience with disability makes her uniquely qualified to help animals and their owners navigate similar challenges?" Parker was quiet for a long moment, processing this possibility. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. Hope warring with the protective pessimism that had sustained him through 9 months of watching his daughter adapt to her new reality. "She could help other kids too," Sarah continued. "Kids who are dealing with new disabilities, who need to see examples of people living full lives despite physical limitations. Emma could be that example. You're asking me to see her accident as a blessing in disguise. I'm asking you to see Emma's response to her accident as a potential source of strength, not just for her, but for everyone she meets." Sarah gestured toward classroom 2B. "Vincent, those children in there are going to remember this day for the rest of their lives. Right now, they're learning that the world can be a scary, unpredictable place. But how this ends will teach them something about how people choose to respond when life becomes difficult." Parker looked toward the classroom, where Mrs. Henderson was leading the children in what appeared to be a quiet song. Their voices carried through the hallway, innocently cheerful despite the circumstances. If you let them go safely, they'll learn that even when people are angry and hurt, they can still choose to do the right thing. They'll learn that adults can work through problems without resorting to violence. Sarah paused. And Emma will grow up knowing that her father chose protecting children over getting revenge. And if they get hurt because I'm too weak to follow through? Vincent, there's nothing weak about changing course when you realize you're heading in the wrong direction. There's nothing weak about choosing your daughter's future over your own anger. Sarah's radio crackled with another transmission. From Mitchell. Sarah, we need a status update. What's Parker's current disposition? Sarah touched her radio to acknowledge but didn't respond verbally. She could see that Parker was close to making a decision, and she didn't want to interrupt the process with tactical communications. Vincent, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer. Sarah waited until she had his full attention. If Emma could see you right now, if she could understand everything that's happening here, what would she want you to do? Parker closed his eyes, and Sarah could see tears forming at the corners. She'd want me to come home. She'd want me to stop being angry all the time. She'd want her dad back. Then give her what she wants. Let these children go home to their families, and then go home to yours. It's not that simple. Once I open that door, once I put down this rifle, I can't take any of it back. Vincent, you can't take it back now. The moment you walked into this school with a weapon, you crossed a line. The only question is how far across that line you're willing to go. Parker opened his eyes and looked directly at Sarah. What happens to Emma while I'm in prison? Who takes care of her? Who advocates for her? Who makes sure she gets the support she needs? Her family, her grandparents, her extended family, the community that rallies around children who need help. Sarah met his gaze, and me. I meant what I said about advocating for Emma, about making sure she has every opportunity to pursue her dreams. Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you an apology for putting you through this. Sarah thought about the question, trying to articulate something she was still figuring out herself. Because helping Emma gives meaning to my own accident. Because if something good can come out of our shared trauma, then maybe it wasn't completely senseless. And because Tommy is in that classroom, and I want him to grow up in a world where people choose to help each other instead of hurt each other. Parker looked toward classroom 2B again, where the children's song had ended and been replaced by the sound of quiet conversation. Sarah could hear Tommy's voice among the others, probably asking Mrs. Henderson when they could go outside for recess. If I do this, if I let them go, I need you to promise me something. What? I need you to promise that you'll visit Emma, that you'll tell her about this conversation. That you'll help her understand that her father isn't a bad person, just a person who made bad choices because he didn't know how to handle his pain. Sarah felt the weight of that promise settling on her shoulders. Vincent, I promise. But I think you should be the one to tell her most of that story. I think she needs to hear from you that people can make mistakes and still be good people. That fathers can mess up and still love their children completely. How can I explain this to a 9-year-old? You tell her the truth in language she can understand. You tell her that you were so angry about what happened to her that you forgot how to think clearly. You tell her that you learned something important about choosing love over anger. Sarah paused. And you tell her that her dad is going to spend his time in prison learning how to be the father she deserves when he comes home. Parker was crying now, silent tears that he didn't try to hide. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted someone to understand what our family has been through. I understand, Vincent. And I think the people in that command center understand too. And after today, a lot of other people are going to understand because your story is going to be told. What do you mean? I mean this situation is going to generate news coverage, investigations, policy discussions. Emma's story is going to become part of a larger conversation about how we support families dealing with sudden disability. Sarah leaned forward. Vincent, you wanted someone to pay attention to what happened to Emma. Well, after today, everyone will be paying attention. Parker wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the rifle now hanging loose at his side. That's not exactly how I planned it. The best outcomes rarely match our original plans. But if we handle this right, if we focus on solutions instead of blame, Emma's story could help other families facing similar challenges. Sarah's radio crackled again, more urgently this time. Sarah, we're seeing movement in Parker's position. We need immediate status confirmation. This time Sarah responded quietly. Situation is stable. Parker is considering release of hostages. Request patience from tactical teams. Mitchell's voice came back immediately. Copy. Standing by. Parker had heard the radio exchange and seemed to realize that time was running out for a peaceful resolution. They're getting nervous out there. They're worried about the children. The longer this goes on, the more likely it becomes that someone will get hurt accidentally. Sarah gestured toward the windows. Vincent, look outside. There are parents gathering behind those police barriers, probably including Emma's grandparents. They're all waiting to find out if their children are coming home safely. Parker moved closer to the window and peered out at the scene below. Sarah could see his expression change as he noticed the crowd of worried parents and family members being held back by police barriers. Emma's there, Parker said suddenly. I can see her wheelchair by the police van. Sarah felt her heart clench. Emma Parker was outside, watching police surround the school where her father was holding children hostage. The 9-year-old was witnessing her father's breakdown in the most public way possible. Vincent, she's going to see how this ends. She's going to see whether her father chooses to hurt people or protect them. Parker stared down at the small figure in the wheelchair, surrounded by adults who were presumably her grandparents. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the child's posture reflected fear and confusion. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't have to see this. You're right, she shouldn't. But she is here, which means you have the opportunity to show her something important about how to handle impossible situations. Parker turned away from the window, his face set with new determination. What do I need to do? Sarah felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. First, you put down the rifle. Then you step away from the classroom door. Then you call out to the children that everything is going to be okay and that they can leave. And then you walk out of that building with your hands up. And you surrender to the officers outside. Sarah met his eyes. And then you start serving your sentence so that you can finish it and get back to being Emma's father. Parker looked at the rifle in his hands as if seeing it for the first time. I've never actually fired one of these things at a person. I bought it after Emma's accident, thinking I might use it on myself. I never thought I'd point it at children. But you didn't fire it, Vincent. You chose to talk instead of shoot. You chose to listen instead of lashing out. Sarah stood up from the small plastic chair. That's what Emma needs to know about her father. That when it mattered most, he chose to protect innocent people. Parker walked to the center of classroom 2A and carefully placed the rifle on Mrs. Henderson's desk. The gesture seemed to drain all the tension from his body, leaving him looking smaller and older than he had when Sarah first arrived. Mrs. Henderson, Parker called across the hallway. It's time for the children to go home. Part 4. The moment of truth. Sarah heard the immediate change in atmosphere from classroom 2B as Parker's words registered with the hostages. Children's voices rose in excitement and confusion, Mrs. Henderson's voice cutting through the chatter as she tried to maintain order while processing this unexpected development. Children, please stay seated for just another moment, Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice carrying the strained cheerfulness that elementary school teachers perfected for crisis situations. We need to wait for the police officers to tell us it's safe to move. Sarah activated her radio. Command, this is Sarah. Parker has surrendered his weapon and announced his intention to release the hostages. Repeat, weapon is down and Parker is complying. The response was immediate and chaotic. Multiple voices came through the radio simultaneously as the tactical teams coordinated their response to this sudden change in the situation. Copy, Sarah. The tactical teams moved with practiced precision, their boots thundering up the stairwell. As they secured the building floor by floor, Sarah could hear their coordinated movements through the hallway, the sharp commands and confirmations that marked a successful hostage extraction. But her attention remained focused on Vincent Parker, who stood in the center of classroom 2A with his hands raised, looking like a man who had just awakened from a long nightmare. Vincent, I need you to walk to the hallway and lie face down on the floor, Sarah instructed, following the protocol she remembered from her SWAT training. Keep your hands visible at all times. Parker nodded and moved slowly toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, Sarah could see the children in classroom 2B beginning to stand up from their circle on the carpet. Tommy was among the first to rise, his eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a child who had been listening carefully to everything that had happened. The first tactical officer appeared at the end of the hallway, his rifle trained on. Parker's position. Suspect, do not move. Maintain your position. Weapon is secure on the desk in classroom 2A. Sarah called out to the approaching officers. Suspect is complying fully. Within seconds, Parker was surrounded by tactical officers, his hands secured behind his back with zip tie restraints. The entire process was efficient and professional, but Sarah could see the fear in Parker's eyes as he was lifted from the floor and positioned against the wall. Vincent, Sarah called out before the officers moved him away. Remember what we talked about. Remember what Emma needs to know. Parker met her eyes one last time and nodded. Thank you, he said quietly. Just before the tactical team escorted him toward the stairs, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway of classroom 2B, her arms spread wide to prevent the children from rushing into the hallway where officers were. Still clearing the scene. Boys and girls, we need to wait just a little bit longer. The police officers are making sure everything is completely safe. Sarah could see Tommy pressed against Mrs. Henderson's side, trying to peer around her to see what was happening in the hallway. His eyes found Sarah's, and she saw relief flood his young face as he recognized his sister. Sarah! Tommy called out, breaking away from Mrs. Henderson despite her attempts to keep the children contained. Tommy, stay back, Sarah warned. But her little brother was already running toward her, his 8-year-old legs carrying him across the hallway faster than anyone could react. Sarah caught Tommy in her arms, feeling his small body trembling against her chest. The emotion she'd been suppressing throughout the entire crisis finally broke through, and she found herself crying as she held her brother close. I was so scared. Tommy whispered into her ear. The man had a gun, and he was angry, and Mrs. Henderson told us to be very quiet. I know, buddy. I know you were scared. But you were so brave, and now everything is okay. Sarah pulled back to look at Tommy's face, checking for any signs of trauma or injury. Are you hurt? Did anyone hurt you? No, nobody hurt us. The man just talked about his little girl and how she couldn't walk anymore. He seemed really sad. Tommy looked back toward classroom 2B, where the other children were still waiting to be released. Is his little girl going to be okay? Sarah was struck by her brother's ability to recognize Parker's pain, even in the midst of his own fear. Yes, Tommy, I think his little girl is going to be just fine. And I think her daddy is going to get the help he needs too. The evacuation of the remaining children proceeded smoothly, with each student being escorted downstairs by tactical officers and immediately reunited with medical personnel, who were standing by to assess their physical and emotional condition. Sarah watched as families were reunited in the parking lot below, parents embracing their children with the desperate relief of people who had feared the worst. Captain Mitchell appeared at the top of the stairs, his face showing the strain of the morning's events, but also unmistakable relief. "Sarah, outstanding work. I don't know how you did it, but you de-escalated a situation that could have ended very differently. Vincent Parker isn't a bad person, Captain. He's a grieving father who didn't know how to handle his pain. He just needed someone to listen to him." Mitchell nodded, though Sarah could see he was already thinking about the administrative aftermath of the incident. "We'll need a full debrief, statements from everyone involved, coordination with the district attorney's office for Parker's charges. Captain, I want to make sure Parker gets connected with appropriate legal representation. And I want to follow through on the commitments I made to him about his daughter. Sarah, you're a civilian now. You can't make commitments on behalf of the department." "I'm not making commitments on behalf of the department. I'm making personal commitments as someone who understands what his family is going through." Sarah looked toward the window, where she could see Emma Parker's wheelchair positioned near the command center. "That little girl is going to need advocates, people who understand both her condition and her father's situation." Mitchell studied Sarah's face for a moment. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. Vincent Parker made a terrible choice today, but it came from a place of genuine anguish about his daughter's future. If we can address that anguish constructively, if we can show Emma and families like hers that there are better ways to handle disability-related challenges, then something positive can come out of this situation. And you think you're the person to do that?" Sarah looked down at her trembling hands, then back at Mitchell. "Captain, 6 months ago, I thought my career was over because I couldn't hold a rifle steady. Today I talked an armed man into surrendering without firing a shot. Maybe this is what my career is supposed to look like now." Mitchell was quiet for a moment, processing Sarah's words. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that the Phoenix Police Department consider creating a position for someone who specializes in crisis intervention for situations involving people with disabilities. Someone who understands both law enforcement protocols and the challenges that come with sudden disability. A specialized negotiator, victim advocate, and community liaison. Someone who can help bridge the gap between law enforcement and the disability community." Sarah gestured toward the classroom where the crisis had unfolded. Vincent Parker felt like his daughter's story didn't matter to anyone. He felt like the system had failed his family. What if we had someone whose job it was to make sure families like his don't fall through the cracks? Mitchell looked intrigued, despite his obvious exhaustion. "You'd be interested in developing something like that?" "I'd be interested in trying to make sure that what happened here today never happens again. And I'd be interested in making sure that kids like Emma Parker get every opportunity to achieve their dreams." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rachel Foster, the neurologist who had been working with Sarah on her tremor management. Dr. Foster was a tall woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that came from years of helping patients navigate life-changing diagnoses. "Sarah, I came as soon as I heard about the situation. Are you all right?" Dr. Foster's eyes immediately went to Sarah's hands, assessing her tremor level with practiced efficiency. "I'm fine, Dr. Foster. Actually, I'm better than fine. I think I might have found a new direction for my career." Dr. Foster raised an eyebrow. "Crisis negotiation?" "Crisis intervention, specializing in disability-related situations. It turns out that understanding what someone is going through can be just as valuable as being able to outshoot them." "Sarah, that's wonderful. And it makes perfect sense given your background and your personal experience with acquired disability." Dr. Foster paused. "Actually, your timing is interesting. I was planning to call you next week about a research program we're developing." "What kind of research program?" "We're studying adaptive technologies for people with movement disorders who want to return to high-precision work. Law enforcement applications, surgical applications, technical work that requires fine motor control. Dr. Foster smiled. We're looking for study participants who have both the technical background and the motivation to push the boundaries of what's possible. Sarah felt a surge of excitement that surprised her with its intensity. You're talking about developing technology that could allow people with tremors to return to precision work? I'm talking about developing technology that could expand the definition of what precision work looks like. Instead of requiring perfect stillness, we're creating systems that work with natural movement patterns and compensate for variability. Captain Mitchell was listening to this conversation with obvious interest. Dr. Foster, are you suggesting that Sarah might be able to return to active duty? I'm suggesting that Sarah might be able to pioneer new approaches to active duty. That could benefit a lot of people. The technology we're developing could help officers with movement disorders, aging officers whose hands aren't as steady as they used to be, even officers dealing with stress-related tremors in high-pressure situations. Sarah looked down at her hands, trying to imagine a future where her tremor was an asset rather than a limitation. What would that look like practically? It would look like being part of a research team that's redefining how we think about disability and capability. It would look like helping to develop technologies that could change law enforcement training, medical procedures, and technical work across multiple industries. Dr. Foster met Sarah's eyes. And it would look like being a test case for whether someone with your condition can not only return to precision work, but potentially perform at levels that exceed what was possible before your injury. Better than before? Sarah, the stabilization systems we're developing don't just compensate for tremors. They enhance precision for everyone who uses them. A sniper using our technology could potentially achieve accuracy that's impossible with unassisted human hands. Sarah felt a chill of possibility run through her. The idea that her condition could lead to capabilities beyond what she'd possessed before the accident was almost too much to process. There would be training involved, Dr. Foster continued. Learning to work with the new technologies, developing techniques that integrate natural movement with mechanical assistance. But if you're interested, we'd love to have you as our first law enforcement participant. Captain Mitchell stepped forward. Dr. Foster, would this research be compatible with developing the kind of specialized crisis intervention position we were just discussing? Not only compatible, but complementary. Sarah would be uniquely qualified to understand the needs of people with disabilities while also having access to cutting-edge adaptive technologies. She could literally demonstrate that disability doesn't have to mean limitation. Sarah thought about Vincent Parker's assumptions regarding his daughter's future, about her own assumptions regarding her own future. How many other people were accepting limitations that might not actually exist? When would this research program begin? Sarah asked. We're starting the pilot phase in 6 weeks. If you're interested, we could begin with baseline assessments next week. Sarah looked around the hallway where the crisis had unfolded, thinking about the children who had been terrified just an hour earlier and were now safely reunited with their families. She thought about Emma Parker, who was probably being told that her father had been arrested, but was also probably being told that everyone was safe. Dr. Foster, I'm very interested. Captain Mitchell, I'd like to explore the crisis intervention position as well. Sarah held up her trembling hands. 6 months ago, I thought these hands meant my career was over. Today, they might have helped save 23 children and one very confused father. Sarah, Captain Mitchell said slowly, if this research program works out, if you can develop these new capabilities, would you be interested in returning to active SWAT duty? The question hung in the air for a moment. 6 months ago, Sarah would have answered immediately, desperately. But now, having experienced a different kind of police work, having discovered that her value as an officer extended beyond her ability to make precision shots, she found herself considering the question more carefully. Captain, I'd be interested in redefining what active SWAT duty looks like. Maybe that includes precision shooting with advanced technology. Maybe it includes crisis intervention and community liaison work. Maybe it includes training other officers to work with adaptive technologies. Sarah smiled. I think I'd like to help expand what it means to be a police officer. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. Sarah, I think you're going to be an excellent research participant. And I think the work we do together could help a lot of people. Speaking of helping people, Sarah said, looking toward the window where Emma Parker was still visible in the parking lot below. I made some promises today that I intend to keep. Part 4. Promises kept. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself walking across the parking lot toward the small figure in the wheelchair who had been waiting patiently near the command center. Emma Parker was smaller than Sarah had expected, with long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that seemed too old for her 9-year-old face. She was flanked by 2 adults who were clearly her grandparents, their faces showing the strain of a day that had brought their worst fears to life. Emma? Sarah approached slowly, her hands clasped behind her back to minimize the visibility of her tremor. I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm the police officer who was talking to your dad today. Emma looked up at Sarah with curiosity rather than fear. Are you the one with the shaky hands? Sarah was startled by the directness of the question, but also impressed by Emma's matter-of-fact tone. Yes, I am. How did you know about that? Daddy told me about you. He said there was a police officer who got hurt in the same accident that hurt me, and that she couldn't hold guns steady anymore. Emma tilted her head. He said that's why he picked you. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that Vincent Parker had been planning this confrontation for months, had specifically researched her background and condition. Emma, your dad and I had a long talk today. He told me a lot about you. Is he going to jail? The question was asked with the same directness that seemed to characterize Emma's communication style. Sarah appreciated that the child wasn't trying to avoid the difficult realities of the situation. Yes, Emma, your dad is going to jail for what he did today. But he's going to jail because he made bad choices, not because he's a bad person. Emma's grandmother started to speak, probably to shield the child from harsh realities, but Emma held up a hand to stop her. Grandma, I need to know what happened. I need to understand why Daddy did this. Sarah knelt down so that she was at eye level with Emma's wheelchair. Emma, your dad loves you very much, but when you got hurt in the accident, he got hurt too. Not in his body, but in his heart and his mind. He was so angry about what happened to you that he stopped thinking clearly. He was angry at you. He was angry at me, yes, but really he was angry at the situation. He was angry that bad things happened to good people for no reason. Sarah paused. Emma, do you remember much about the accident? I remember being in the car with Mommy. I remember the loud noise and then waking up in the hospital. Emma's expression was matter-of-fact. I remember the doctor telling me that I might not be able to walk anymore. That must have been very scary. It was scary. But you know what was scarier? Emma looked directly at Sarah. Watching Daddy cry every day. Watching him get angry at everything. Watching him stop being Daddy. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as she realized the emotional burden this 9-year-old had been carrying. Not only was Emma dealing with her own disability, but she was also watching her father struggle with grief and anger that he didn't know how to process. Emma, your dad asked me to tell you something important. He asked me to tell you that he's going to use his time in jail to learn how to be the daddy you deserve. He's going to get help with his anger, and he's going to learn about all the amazing things you can do. What kind of amazing things? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Emma the videos she had shared with Vincent earlier. Do you remember wanting to be a veterinarian? Emma's eyes lit up for the first time since Sarah had approached. I still want to be a veterinarian. Daddy thinks I can't because of my wheelchair, but I think he's wrong. Emma, Your dad is wrong. And these videos are going to show you why. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah shared video after video of people with disabilities pursuing careers that others might have considered impossible. Veterinarians, surgeons, engineers, athletes, artists. Each video showed adaptive techniques, assistive technologies, and creative solutions that expanded the definition of what was possible. Emma watched with growing excitement, asking technical questions about the equipment and techniques that impressed Sarah with their sophistication. This was clearly a child with both intelligence and determination. "Sarah," Emma said after watching a video of a Paralympic archer, "do you think my wheelchair could have special equipment for veterinary work?" "Emma, I think you're going to help design this special equipment for veterinary work. I think you're going to be one of the people who figures out new ways to help animals." Emma's grandmother had been listening to this conversation with visible emotion. "Officer Martinez, you're giving her hope that might not be realistic." Sarah looked up at the older woman. "Ma'am, with respect, I think the question isn't whether Emma's goals are realistic. The question is whether we're going to help her achieve them or talk her out of trying. But the practical challenges are significant, but not insurmountable. Emma, would you like to meet some other kids who are pursuing careers that people told them were impossible?" Emma nodded eagerly. "There's a support group that meets at Phoenix General Hospital. Kids and teenagers with various disabilities who are working toward ambitious goals. Some of them are dealing with paralysis, some with amputations, some with conditions like mine that affect fine motor control." Sarah smiled. "I think you'd like them. And I think they'd like you." Emma's grandfather spoke for the first time. "Officer Martinez, we appreciate what you're trying to do, but our family has been through a lot today. Emma needs stability, not more disruption." Sarah understood the protective instinct, but she also remembered Vincent Parker's words about Emma crying at night, dreaming about the things she thought she'd never do again. "Sir, I understand your concern. But Emma also needs to know that her life can still be everything she dreams it can be. Maybe even more than she originally dreamed." Sarah turned back to Emma. "Emma, I want to make you a promise." "The same promise I made to your dad. I'm going to help make sure you have every opportunity to pursue your dreams. I'm going to connect you with resources, people, technologies that can help you achieve whatever goals you set for yourself." "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Sarah looked down at her trembling hands, then back at Emma's determined face. "Because you and I are dealing with bodies that don't work the way they used to. And I think we can help each other. Figure out how to work with what we have instead of being limited by what we've lost." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Sarah, do you think you'll ever be able to shoot a gun again?" The question surprised Sarah with its directness. "I don't know, Emma, but I'm going to find out. I'm working with doctors who are developing new technologies that might make it possible. And if it doesn't work?" Sarah thought about the events of the day, about the satisfaction she'd felt in talking Vincent Parker down from his desperate plan. "Then I'll find other ways to be a police officer. Ways that use different skills." Emma smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "I like that. Finding different ways to do what you want to do. Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure. If you could say something to your dad right now, what would it be?" Emma thought for a long moment. "I would tell him that I'm still the same person I was before the accident. I just do things differently now. And I would tell him that I need him to believe in me, not feel sorry for me." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable child. "Emma, that's exactly what your dad needs to hear. And I'm going to make sure he gets that message. When can I see him?" Sarah looked at Emma's grandparents, understanding that this was a family decision that extended beyond her authority. "That will depend on your family and the legal process. But Emma, I think it's important that you do see him when the time is right. I think he needs to see how strong and determined you are." Emma's grandmother finally spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Officer Martinez, you really think Emma can achieve her goals?" "Ma'am, I think Emma can achieve goals that none of us have even thought of yet. But she's going to need support from people who believe in her potential rather than focusing on her limitations." Sarah stood up and handed Emma a business card with her contact information. "Emma, this has my phone number and email address. I want you to stay in touch with me. I want to know how you're doing, what you're learning, what challenges you're facing. You really want to help me? Emma, helping you gives meaning to my own accident. If something good can come out of both of our injuries, then maybe they weren't completely senseless." Emma studied the business card carefully. "Sarah, do you think my dad will be proud of me if I become a veterinarian?" Sarah felt tears threatening again. "Emma, I think your dad is going to be proud of you no matter what you become. But I think he's going to be especially proud of how you chose to respond to the hardest thing that ever happened to you. By not giving up. By not giving up, and by helping other people not give up either." Emma tucked the business card into a pocket on her wheelchair. "Sarah, when you find out if you can shoot guns again, will you tell me? I'll tell you. And Emma, when you start working toward becoming a veterinarian, will you tell me about that too? It's a deal." Sarah shook Emma's small hand, noting that the child's grip was firm and confident despite everything she'd been through. As Sarah walked back toward the command center, she reflected on the day's events. 24 hours ago, she had been a disabled former police officer struggling to pour coffee without spilling it. Now she was a crisis intervention specialist with a research opportunity and a personal mission to help a remarkable child achieve her dreams. Her hands were still shaking. They probably always would be. But for the first time since the accident, Sarah Martinez felt like her tremor might be the beginning of something new rather than the end of something old. Part 5. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Sarah found herself standing in Dr. Foster's laboratory at Phoenix General Hospital, wearing a harness connected to sensors that monitored every muscle movement in her arms and hands. The modified rifle in front of her looked like something from a science fiction movie, bristling with electronic components and computer interfaces that made her old service weapon seem primitive by comparison. "The key is to stop fighting the tremor and start working with it," Dr. Foster explained, adjusting the calibration on the weapon's stabilization system. "Your natural movement patterns are actually quite predictable once we map them properly." Sarah settled into the firing position, feeling the familiar weight of a rifle against her shoulder for the first time since the accident. The electronic scope displayed not just the target downrange, but also real-time data about her hand position, muscle tension, and movement patterns. "How does it feel?" asked Dr. Foster. "Different. Like the rifle is alive, responding to me, instead of just being an object I'm trying to control." Sarah peered through the scope, watching as the crosshairs moved in small, smooth patterns that followed her natural tremor but remained centered on the target. "It's hard to explain. The system learns your specific movement patterns and predicts where you're trying to aim based on the overall trend of your movements rather than requiring perfect stillness." Dr. Foster monitored Sarah's vital signs on a separate screen. "What you're feeling is the rifle working with your body instead of against it." Sarah squeezed the trigger, feeling the familiar recoil as the bullet left the barrel. Through the scope, she watched the impact appear dead center on the target, 200 meters downrange. "Perfect shot," Dr. Foster announced, checking the electronic scoring system. "Better than perfect, actually. That's more accurate than the baseline shots you took with unassisted equipment before your accident." Sarah fired 5 more rounds, each one striking within millimeters of the center of the target. The consistency was remarkable, even more impressive than her best days as a SWAT sniper. "Dr. Foster, this is incredible. It's like having superhuman precision." "That's exactly what it is. The technology doesn't just compensate for your tremor. It enhances your natural abilities." An officer using this system could achieve accuracy that's impossible with unassisted human hands. Sarah set down the rifle and turned to face Dr. Foster. What are the limitations? There have to be limitations. Battery life, environmental conditions that interfere with the sensors, the learning curve for officers who are used to traditional equipment. Dr. Foster paused. And cost, of course. This system is currently about 20 times more expensive than a standard police rifle. But if it works, if it can help officers with various conditions return to active duty, then the cost becomes justified. Sarah, you're the proof of concept. If we can demonstrate that someone with your level of tremor can not only return to precision shooting but actually exceed previous performance standards, then we can make the case for widespread adoption. Sarah thought about Vincent Parker, currently serving his sentence at a minimum security facility outside Phoenix. She'd visited him twice, bringing updates about Emma's progress and discussing the support systems they were developing for families dealing with sudden disability. Dr. Foster, what if we could demonstrate the technology in a real-world situation? Not just on a firing range, but in an actual police operation. What do you have in mind? Sarah smiled. Captain Mitchell has been developing a crisis intervention unit based on our conversations after the school siege. They need a precision shooter who can also serve as a negotiator and community liaison. Someone who understands both law enforcement and disability issues. Someone who can talk to people like Vincent Parker before they reach the point of desperation. Someone who can demonstrate that disability doesn't mean the end of possibility. Dr. Foster looked intrigued. You're talking about field testing. Our technology in active police situations. I'm talking about proving that adaptive technology can not only restore capabilities, but enhance them. And I'm talking about using those enhanced capabilities to help people who are struggling with the same issues I've struggled with. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a text message from Emma Parker. Over the past 3 months, Sarah and Emma had maintained regular contact, with Sarah providing updates about her research participation and Emma sharing her progress in the adaptive sports program Sarah had connected her with. The message read, "Sarah, guess what? I got accepted into the junior veterinary program at the zoo. They're going to let me work with the animal medical team this summer. Also, I designed a new wheelchair attachment for my archery equipment. Want to see it?" Sarah showed the message to Dr. Foster, who smiled broadly. "It sounds like your young friend is thriving. Emma has been amazing. She's exceeded every expectation, achieved goals that her family thought were impossible just a few months ago." Sarah pocketed her phone. She's also been asking when she can see her father again. How is Vincent Parker adjusting to incarceration? Better than expected, actually. He's been participating in counseling programs, taking classes on disability advocacy, working with other inmates who have children with special needs. Sarah paused. I think he's beginning to understand that Emma's accident wasn't the end of her story, just the beginning of a different chapter. And when will he be released? 18 months, assuming good behavior. Emma will be 11 by then, probably already working as a junior volunteer at the veterinary clinic she's connected with. Sarah smiled. I think Vincent is going to be amazed by what his daughter accomplishes while he's away. Dr. Foster began shutting down the testing equipment, preparing to conclude their session. Sarah, I have to ask, are you ready to return to active duty? To put this technology to use in real police work? Sarah thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, she would have answered immediately, desperately. But her experience with crisis intervention, her work with Emma and Vincent, her growing understanding of the disability community had expanded her perspective on what police work could look like. Dr. Foster, I'm ready to return to active duty. But I want to return as something new. Not just a sniper who uses adaptive technology, but a police officer who specializes in bridging communities that don't often understand each other. the disability community, and law enforcement. People who are struggling with sudden life changes, people who feel like the system has failed them, people who need someone to understand their challenges rather than just arrest them or dismiss them. Sarah looked at the high-tech rifle that had just allowed her to achieve precision beyond her wildest expectations. This technology is incredible, and I'm grateful for it. But the most important thing I've learned over the past 6 months isn't about shooting. It's about listening. Dr. Foster nodded thoughtfully. Sarah, I think you're going to revolutionize more than just adaptive technology for law enforcement. I think you're going to change how police work is done. I hope so. Because there are a lot of Vincent Parkers out there. People who are angry and desperate and feel like nobody understands what they're going through. Sarah shouldered her equipment bag. If we can reach them before they reach the point of crisis, if we can show them that there are better ways to handle impossible situations, then maybe we can prevent the next school siege. And if we can demonstrate that people with disabilities can not only return to demanding careers but excel in them, then maybe we can change how society thinks about limitation and possibility. Sarah walked toward the exit of the laboratory, feeling the familiar tremor in her hands, but no longer seeing it as a limitation. Dr. Foster, I think Emma Parker said it best. We're not broken people who need to be fixed. We're whole people who just do things differently now. And sometimes, doing things differently leads to doing them better. Sarah stepped out into the Phoenix sunshine, thinking about the phone call she needed to make to Captain Mitchell about returning to active duty. She thought about the letter she wanted to write to Vincent Parker, updating him on Emma's latest achievements. She thought about the presentation she was developing for other police departments about crisis intervention techniques for disability-related situations. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her car keys, but Sarah Martinez was no longer bothered by the tremor. She had learned to see it not as evidence of what she'd lost, but as a reminder of everything she'd gained. 6 months ago, they had called her Shaky Sarah with pity and dismissal. Now, as she prepared to return to active duty with capabilities that exceeded anything she'd possessed before her accident, Sarah realized that her nickname had become a badge of honor. She was Shaky Sarah, the police officer who had learned that sometimes breaking down is the first step toward breaking through. The sniper who had discovered that the most important targets aren't always the ones you can see through a scope. The woman who had turned her greatest limitation into her most valuable asset. And tomorrow she would begin the work of helping other people discover the same truth about their own limitations and possibilities. Sarah drove home with steady hands on the wheel, her tremor compensated by the same kind of adaptive technology that was revolutionizing her career. In the distance, she could see the water tower where she might have taken an impossible shot 6 months ago. Now she realized the impossible shot hadn't been the one through a rifle scope. It had been the shot at rebuilding her life, her purpose, and her understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. That shot she had made perfectly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.